What you want more than anything is you want to meet people with different experiences. And I've always sort of found you would see things that you would not automatically have come across.
Hello and welcome to the Parliamentary Review podcast, the podcast that puts leadership in focus. I'm Jonathan White, and in each episode I'm joined by directors, CEOs, CFOs, government ministers, chairmen, presidents, maybe one day even the President of the United States. That is, if he still is the President. The aim is to discover who these people are, the people who get up each morning and make the world work. We discuss everything from the future of British trade deals to government reforms to the Court of Appeals, and of course the innovation and success in the country that make it all worthwhile in the end. We also get their take on the current political and economic state of the country. Later on in this episode, you'll have the chance to hear our exclusive interview with Lord Pickles, former Secretary of State for Communities and Local Government, Chairman of the Conservative Party, and of course current co-chairman of the Parliamentary Review. But for now, we're joined by Fiona Grant-Jones, owner of Grant-Jones Accountancy. Founded in 2006 and based in Camberley, Surrey, Grant-Jones Accountancy are a firm providing tax advice, business support, business growth advice, and accountancy services. Fiona is a strong believer that they have an opportunity and obligation to make a positive contribution to business and their owners, to the economy and the wider world. We discuss these topics and more now. Fiona, welcome.
Good morning.
Well, thank you very much, first of all, for coming on today, Fiona. And I think it might be a nice place to start. I know it's been a few months since, obviously, Grant-Jones Accountancy has been in the review. I think the listeners would love to know how you all are and how the firm is doing.
Well, we're all fighting fit. We are doing very well at the moment. We've obviously got the January tax deadline looming, so we're all working exceptionally hard and on weekends as well. So it's quite hard work, but it's rewarding work at the moment because we know that we're helping small businesses to meet their obligations. So it's good. Absolutely,
and I know that's something you're particularly passionate about, Fiona, in helping business owners, no matter their size. I think we'll discuss that probably a bit more detail later, but the firm itself, and for those that don't know, established now back in 2006, 14 years ago this year, so congratulations. But what was it you set out to do in the first place, Fiona, when that was different from others in the market when you originally founded the firm?
Well, originally, when I established my business, it was more of a lifestyle business around my young children. And as the children grew, then so did my business. And I started to meet more and more with SMEs who were struggling to grow in a very difficult climate. And my background has been I've been trained in industry as a management accountant and tax advisor. And so I hope that at Grant-Jones we actually bring much more of a business bias. So we work as a partner to businesses, a virtual partner, if you like, helping businesses to grow. And also to the way that we like to differentiate ourselves is to provide best practice services and different sorts of services to help businesses grow.
And I think for so many people and businesses, no matter what business it is, and I think this is something you've expressed as well, that when it comes to dealing with accounts, it's often seen as a very laborious, strenuous process. And I think something that you've set out and clearly succeeded in doing, Fiona, is making sure it can be much more than that.
Oh yes, absolutely. A lot of clients don't actually see their accountant from one year to the next. They bring in their books and leave them with the accountant, and then they come in and sign it and leave them again. We like to work with our clients on a quarterly or monthly basis so that we keep in touch with what's going on in the business so that we can actually help them. So we help them to develop budgets and forecasts as well as doing the year-end accounts and the tax. We also look at the economic environment that we're all trading in, and we look at strategies that help our businesses to cope with, for example, short-term cash flow or trying to find the right people, for example.
And I think the extraordinary thing there is, and I think for a lot of people it would be quite shocking, and it's probably so true since you've pointed it out, that there are so many people out there that don't perhaps even know who their accountant is. And which is, when you say it out loud, it is an extraordinary thing.
Yes, definitely. And I think people seem to see that the year-end accounts are a necessary evil in order to get the tax done. And they don't necessarily look at what the accounts are actually telling them about their business.
Exactly.
And also, most of the time, it's 12 months out of date. So...
Quite. Now, as I mentioned, obviously, when you established the business now back in 2006, it wasn't that time, or 2 short years later, was perhaps one of the more turbulent years in our recent economic history.
Yes.
To put it mildly, as a young business, what challenges did that present? Because, I mean, there were an awful lot of businesses, accountancy firms of all shapes and sizes that did not come to see 2009. And what lessons did you learn from that experience?
Yes, I think the main thing to remember in hard times is actually cash is king. So we were very careful in how we planned our cash flow, and as I say, planning in the long term is also key. We've ended up moving our model to an increased focus on social media and marketing. So I now have an almost full-time sales executive who works for the business, which previously I think is unheard of in an accountancy practice. And we also have a marketing team that are constantly on the lookout for new opportunities. So we're trying to gauge the environment and to see long term how we can plan to make our way through the choppy waters, if you like. And that's what we've done since, I suppose, 2008, 2009.
And it's clearly worked, hasn't it, Fiona? Which is the great thing. Now, something I did want to talk about specifically, since I think, correct me if I'm wrong here, Fiona, I think it was since 2017, yourselves have been part of the B1G1 Business for Good. Now, I've got to say I wasn't familiar with the scheme, and it does sound fantastic. Would you mind, Fiona, perhaps just telling the listeners what it is and some of the fantastic outcomes that delivers?
Yes, absolutely. So back in 2017, we were looking at our business and how we operate, and also looking at how we could actually give back to the wider community. I mean, our philosophy is that we want to help small businesses thrive, and in doing that helps the local community by producing more jobs. But then we were also thinking, well, how can we take that out to the wider part of the world? And the answer came to us in the form of an organisation called B1G1, which means buy one, give one. And they have a number of worthy causes that you can link your services to. So that, for example, every time we produce a set of accounts or a tax return for somebody, we give 365 days of water to a family in Africa or another part of the world. And so from that point of view, it helps us to make an impact, I suppose, to give back to the world. And I was just trying, sorry for the delay, I was just trying to find what our latest, sorry about online, this real time.
If you're having a quick look there, I will say that it's clearly, I think, a scheme that not only, for obvious reasons, does good in the world, but I think it can be so grounding for so many businesses in this country to know, and for people to remind themselves that there can be so many positive externalities by just owning a business in that way.
Absolutely. And for example, since we joined the scheme in 2017, we have made 37,185 impacts. So what that means is that we've an impact is where we actually impact on the lives of the local community. So, for example, we're involved in a number of schemes. We've given 70 people in Bangladesh income-generating tools. We've given 30 days of access to tools to disadvantaged women, and all sorts of projects, 2,555 days worth of seeds to farmers, and we've built classrooms, and we've also contributed to a lot of water.
Well, it's superb, and how fantastic it is you're able to express that, in genuine numbers like that, as you call them, impacts. I think it very much becomes far more relatable on a human level. And I know that's something, it's fantastic you're able to do it, Fiona. It's something we'll be detailing, I think, in a few weeks' time, because it's such a fantastic cause. And we could talk about it for the next hour, but we shouldn't. I'm conscious of the time. We will, though, if I could ask you, Fiona, perhaps if we take a step back from the business and look at the sector more broadly. If in your opinion, what would you say are the main challenges the sector would be facing in the next 18 months or so?
I think, it's the difficulties at the moment. We've got Brexit coming up, looming on the horizon. We've got the uncertainty of long negotiations over trade deals and all that sort of thing. So I think in general it's going to be very difficult for accountants and SMEs. And if SMEs are struggling, then obviously the accountants who serve them are also going to struggle. And we have to keep thinking about how we differentiate our services. So we've got to be a lot more flexible in what we're offering our clients. We have to look at the challenges that they are facing, and we have to tailor our services to cater to that. And so from our point of view, we're trying to provide, through our various services, we provide a performance evaluation and development system. And that means that we sit down with the clients once a quarter or once a month, and we go over the figures that are actually on the system at the moment. We compare them with the budget and how they're doing against their budget. We discuss any changes in the future as to how things are going to impact them. And then through that, we can help them to change their budgets and think of new strategies to overcome them. And so really the way we have to think about it is the key is we have to serve the customer. Otherwise, the customer is now not going to come back to us. So our success is tied up with their success, if that makes sense.
Perfect. So it's a very a good way of putting it, in fact. And I don't know whether you'd agree or disagree with this. If you'd have to tell me. But I think on some of the points you made there, especially when it comes to uncertainty, I think for the last, let's be honest, since the referendum on the European Union now, which will be it was in 2016, wasn't it? There has been a mini state of sort of constitutional crisis in this country, and we saw a parliament after the 2017 general election that was it just couldn't. It was essentially stuck in some sort of awful limbo. Despite government not getting anywhere, and you must have seen this on the ground every day, Fiona, small businesses in this country kept going, kept employing, kept growing the economy. And so there is a great hope that no matter when we, of course, leave the EU on the 31st of January, no matter what happens after that and what happens to the trade negotiations, after the last 3 years, you do sort of feel as if a lot of small businesses can get through anything.
Yes, I mean, I certainly hope so. Yes. I think the British people as a nation, we are great. We have great entrepreneurial spirit, and I quite often meet people who have full-time jobs, but actually they want to have their own business that they run on the weekend or in the evenings, and it's quite fascinating how feverish we are when it comes to sort of our entrepreneurial ideas and what we can do about it. And that's fantastic, but I think what needs to be recognised is that there are so many tiny little micro businesses around that need to be nurtured, that when the government, for example, announces new legislation with regards to employee rights, which are vitally important, obviously,
yes.
We also need to think about support for the small employer. So, for example, I have obviously benefited from statutory maternity pay myself, but until I actually became an employer, I didn't realise the challenges of when somebody goes on maternity leave. You've also got to hire somebody to replace them. You've got to train them. There are all these extra things from the employer's standpoint that we need extra help from. And little tiny businesses need that, because to take that step up, they need to start employing people. And we want to do it in a way that is not unfair to the employee, but at the same time, it's expensive, if that makes sense.
Perfect. And that perspective on things is very important. And let us hope, because the next year still may be unpredictable, that it's as smooth for business as possible. Now, maybe I'll put you on the spot here then. Maybe it's a bit unfair, but let's say if this afternoon you had the powers of the Secretary of State and a magic wand, what would you do? What reforms would you bring in? Anything really that you think would really aid businesses like yours and others up and down the country?
Right, gosh, all this power at my hand.
And you've got 2 minutes.
Oh, I better get going. I think we really need to help the little tiny and small, any small business to grow. And I think the key to that is helping small employers. And I understand that we have the employment allowance to compensate for things like the loss of the being able to claim back the statutory sick pay. But it doesn't really go far enough. I think there needs to be far more help in the way of grants or legislation that would help small employers to grow.
I think you speak for a lot of people there, and I can. It would only be exceptionally popular. Now, I would say, because I'm conscious again of we have to wrap things up. Perhaps you started this business obviously because of a personal reason, because of children. And as you've already said, there is a great entrepreneurial spirit in this country. What advice would you have, especially to perhaps, let's say, younger people who are thinking about either entering the exotic world of accountancy, or indeed starting their own business?
I think my advice would be never to give up, because you never know what is round the corner. And it's running your own business, whether you're an accountant or whether you're, a consultant or something like that. There are ups and downs all of the time. And 1 minute you've got loads of business coming in, and then the next minute, nothing. The phone doesn't ring at all. And it's getting used to the fact that it might seem really bleak, but actually there is more business around the corner, and all you have to do is to get out, have conviction in yourself, and go and get it.
Words to live by. Fiona, what are the plans for Grant-Jones Accountancy for the year going forward?
Right. Well, we have our office on the corner of the High Street in Camberley. We've just had new signage put up, and we're going out there and getting as much more new business as we can. We want to grow. We want to hire more people in the local community, and we want to give back to the wider world through being a business for good with B1G1.
Superb. I can only wish you all the luck in the world for the rest of January, and hope not what remains of the weekends aren't completely ruined for you.
Thank you.
In the meantime, Fiona, it's been a pleasure talking, and I hope you can come on again before long.
Lovely. I look forward to it. Thank you very much for having me.
Thank you, Fiona.
Thank you.
I hope you all enjoyed our chat with Fiona, and especially learning more about the challenges facing the sector and how the whole team at Grant-Jones Accountancy are continuing to raise standards. If you haven't heard it before, coming up now is our conversation with the Parliamentary Review's co-chairman, Eric Pickles. Lord Pickles served as Secretary of State for Communities and Local Government in David Cameron's cabinet before receiving a peerage in 2018. Lord Pickles remains active as the United Kingdom's anti-corruption champion and the country's special envoy for post-Holocaust issues, as well as being a keen vexillologist. That's flags to you and me. I hope you enjoy listening as much as I enjoyed speaking to Eric. Here it is now.
Lord Pickles, thank you very much for joining us today.
Pleasure.
Now, I'm sure you won't mind me reminding the listeners that you've been involved in politics, both local and national, for quite a number of decades. Indeed, before the days we were in the common market. Of course, MP for Brentwood for
25 years.
Absolutely. What would you? I mean, of course, you president there as well, despite being a proud Yorkshireman, obviously representing a good Essex seat. What would you say to your old constituents right now? You hang in there; it'll be all right.
Well, it's different when you're a member of Parliament, because you've got to kind of toe the government line a little bit. So one thing I found now is I've got my weekend back and I say what I want, and I think I always say to our constituents is that it is pretty hopeless down there.
Excellent. Well, on that, I think, honest assessment, it's something I think the Parliamentary Review has always done quite well, talking frankly about problems, issues, and also not just good practice, but leadership. Well, I was
used to read it when I was a member of Parliament, because, what you want more than anything is you want to meet people with different experiences, and I've always sort of found it quite a kind of a chatty magazine, but also you would see things that you would not automatically have come across, and certainly attended the receptions over the year, and it's amazing the things you kind of pick up.
And I think it's important to stress it's not because politicians aren't interested, because honestly, as you all know more than anyone, it's an issue of time. And to be able to have a channel and a platform where you can keep communication lines between businesses, schools and policymakers is so exceptionally important.
No, I think so, and it's important that it's beholden to nobody. People, pay to be part of the publication, pay for to be members, and it's a way of not being beholden to government, not beholden to anything.
Now, echoing the words, of course, your fellow chairman, Lord Blunkett, has said, what some might not know is that you started your political journey perhaps even further left than David Blunkett.
Absolutely, I was a communist.
Now, what was it?
At the age of 14, I was bought the Trotskys History of the Russian Revolution, and I read it from cover to cover. I tried to read it a few years back, and I just couldn't follow anything.
Oh, so I was going to say perhaps you might know the minds of the shadow front bench better than they do themselves.
From my position when I first joined, I would regard them as recalcitrant running dogs of the capitalist system.
Now, what was it then that moved you from radical Marxists to running the only inner-city council controlled by the Conservatives in the 80s?
Well, I was very young, and I was fascinated by what was happening in what was then Czechoslovakia and Dubček, and the revolution that was taking place there inside communism, and the way in which he was repressed by Mr. Brezhnev, and the tanks and taking over. I was so angry. And I'm 16, remember. I'm really angry. And I thought, what's the most outrageous thing I can do? I'll join the Conservative Party as a protest. And I kind of sticked around. My family thought it was the funniest thing that ever happened to it. I was Eric the Tory. And
I think you announced this quite grandly as a grand protest.
I did indeed. But, I kept going down, and it was an exciting time. People were developing the ideas of what the Conservative Party should be. Selsdon man, even Heath looked radical. We had different ideas, and it eventually clicked. And at some point, I became a Conservative, and that was 51 years ago. I think I'm definitely 100% a Tory now.
Through and through.
Through and through.
Although I do know the story, most people might guess that a dynamo Conservative like yourself would have perhaps a portrait of Mr. Thatcher or Mr. Churchill in their office. But who is it that you have?
I'd Che Guevara. Which I always had him over my left shoulder for visitors, and they always used to you see their eyes going up and thinking, I can't possibly be it. Someone asked me if it was Desi Arnaz. I felt it was married to Lucille Ball. But no, the reason I did that was to remind me and to remind my officials that without constant vigilance, the cigar-chomping commies would take over.
I'm sure David Blunkett was in the room to reply to that, actually. But in that long journey, you eventually ended up, of course, in 2010, doing something most Conservatives would never thought they would have to do, but in a coalition government with, of all people, the Liberal Democrats.
That's right.
Now, for something I think perhaps today more than ever, people and our politics seems to be almost wholly determined on how we voted in a referendum 3 years ago.
Yeah, the most normal thing would happen after something like that would be the country would come together, and if anything, we're more divided. I thought working in the coalition, I'm proud to have been part of that coalition. I'm proud to have worked alongside the Liberal Democrats, who I think realised that, like all minority partners in a coalition, they would suffer at the polls.
Do you think we've lost the ability recently as a people to work with those that we might disagree with on issues more than we used to?
I'm not sure that's right. You can see various members of the Conservative Party working closely with Liberal Democrats and Labour to defeat their own government. But it's not a thing I think I would want to encourage.
Quite. And I should remind listeners, we are recording this in Victoria, just over the road at Cardinal Place, a fantastically new development site which wouldn't have been there without some of your legislation. What was the proudest?
I personally approved it.
Absolutely. What was the proudest moment, do you think, in serving Secretary for 5 years?
It's my actual proudest moment. We did a thing called Troubled Families, which was the first centre-right attempt to deal with poverty and to deal with difficult families that were causing a disproportionately large amount of call upon the state. And it was on the basis of tough love. It's on the basis of getting people into jobs. It's about dealing with the family as a whole, not just one or two individuals that were having a problem. And I'm pleased that it's continued.
And since, I should very much stress, since of course you're stepped down being an MP, you do have your weekends back, but that's not to say you haven't remained very active and very busy. Of course, because you're the government's anti-corruption champion, shone the harsh light of day over malpractice in the local government. Indeed, the Queen's speech we've just had includes some of your recommendations from 2016. I think a couple of things on that. First of all, are you surprised, I may imagine you may not be, at some of the backlash towards, in this country, introducing voter ID for voting?
It is absurd, and it's particularly absurd coming from the Labour Party, because it was largely Labour's vulnerability that got my interest in trying to do something about it. And it's a bit like saying, you're requiring people to show some ID, that this is suppressing voting. It's a bit like saying the post office is suppressing parcels because they demand to see some ID. I think they've got a bee into their bonnet that this is something like that goes in the state to repress. It's not. It's about giving confidence to the system. Now, the Electoral Commission and foreign observers have warned us for such a long time that our electoral system is vulnerable. And it's to misquote John Major, we are really sort of old maids cycling to evensong and war-bane. Yeah, I mean, it's such a basic thing. It's an important thing. And it was kind of interesting in some of the trials. They did a focus group with a bunch of young Asian girls. And they said they thought the process of a photo ID would actually give them a greater confidence in the fairness of the system. I make all kinds of recommendations to stop postal vote harvesting, to stop various fraud taking place, to stop intimidation at counts, to stop intimidation outside polling stations.
And I think you referenced it earlier, the Westminster bubble. A lot of the places where this occurs and the places where this does go on are places where perhaps many people in the press don't usually go to.
No, they don't. We saw a YouGov poll that said the overwhelming majority, well in the 60%, thought this idea was sensible.
Yeah, and I imagine you're quite proud that recommendation is in the speech.
Yes, I mean, I'm a bit frustrated they didn't do it sooner, but nevertheless, I'm very happy that they are doing it.
It's as if the government's time has been taken up by something else and we've not focused on anything domestic.
Absolutely.
But with a man, though, with his roots in local government, do you think, and how much you've worked with that report, especially looking at them carefully, how would you rate our current state of local municipal politics?
Local government's very good. I mean, local government, don't get me wrong, it's by and large corruption-free, and it does a remarkably good job. And it was, in truth, my worries about local government and that these measures were brought in. I don't believe the fraud is big enough to be able to take a parliamentary seat, but it is big enough to take a council. And if you are negligent, uncaring about the probity of the poll, you're likely to be equally negligent about the awarding of contracts to your friends. So it's all past that. But local government is a very enduring part of our constitution. I got a bit of stick because we had to take some money from them, but by and large they survive very well.
Excellent. Now, beyond obviously that work, you're also, of course, the British envoy for post-Holocaust issues.
Yeah, sure.
Very dear to your heart. I know you've done some fantastic work recently, including with obviously former Shadow Chancellor from the Review, Ed Balls. Would you mind, if you could just let the listeners know what projects you are working on with that, and really the importance that has to so many communities around the country? Well,
I used to be very unpleasant about Ed Ball, and he used to be very unpleasant about me. But I found working with him remarkably easy, and we've not had a single row in 2 years, and by now we're beginning to be able to finish each other's sentences. We're building a memorial to the Holocaust next to Parliament with a learning centre below it, and the reason why the Prime Minister chose that site is that it was David Cameron, and he wanted to ensure that when people left the memorial they would look and see Parliament and recognise that it was the last bastion against tyranny. But more important, to remind people who work in Parliament that the legislature has a choice. It can either protect its citizens or it can oppress its citizens. And we do know that it was a compliant legislature that brought in the Nuremberg laws. And at a time when there are parts of Europe that are seeking to rewrite their history and seeking to see themselves as only the victims of the Nazis, I'm determined that we should tell the truth in an unblinking way. We are, I suppose, at a critical crossroads when the last survivor is likely to be no longer with us within the next decade and a half. And at that point, we do know that history starts to be reassessed. I think it was Simon Sharma that talked about this. And he was referring to the French Revolution. And of course, most of the books written in the 1850s are the ones that have shaped our view of the French Revolution. But the difference is this, that slightly over 100 years ago, my grandfather Edgar grabbed hold of his Lee Enfield and walked out of a trench in the Somme and walked towards the Germans. And within a few minutes, most of the people he'd been brought up with, most of his friends were dead. Nobody doubts that he did that. But there's a whole industry out there that doubts that the Holocaust took place. So that's why it's important that we help frame that narrative.
And you referenced as well, it's so important, especially at this time of history, so many years afterwards, that young people in schools get the correct education about it. How do we compare as a country in doing that compared to some of our European friends?
We I think, compare remarkably well, and particularly because we've got a mixture of things. We ensure through the lessons of Auschwitz that 2 pupils from every secondary school go to Auschwitz each year, that they have a preliminary meeting, a visit and a wrap-up. We ensure that Holocaust Day is remembered in January. Now, I can remember starting that, or I'm not starting it, but being part of a foot soldier of people that put it together. And, it was like one man and a dog, but now it's quite a massive, it's a massive event. So I think we are quite good at remembering that. I think where we perhaps do need to have a wider understanding is beyond the death camps. And we need to kind of understand the Einsatzgruppen, which was the roving murder squads, how important they were. You were more likely to have been shot in a ditch than to end up in a death camp. The hinterland of that is Lithuania, where I was last week, talking to colleagues and through Belarus and the Ukraine. And it's really important that we ensure that we register where those death sites are.
And I think certainly, and I'm going to sit down next to speak, which hopefully won't be too long away. It's something I think we'd be very happy to keep updates on how that project is going, because it's so important and people do need to be aware of it. Looking to the future, though, I imagine actually that it's a positive thing that this country has to look forward to.
Well, we're a large trading nation. We're a large economy. We're a liberal democracy, and it will be good to get through Brexit over the coming years, and it will be good to start to look at some of the social issues that we need to tackle. Those have been left behind by our economic progress, and it will be good to see some solid investment in this country, both in terms of its infrastructure but also in terms of the way it operates as a democracy.
And I know there's going to be a huge focus of the next review. Pickles, thank you very much for joining us.
Thank you.
As always, it's been a pleasure interviewing and learning from our guests. I hope you all enjoyed listening. Until next time, I'm off to the Westminster Arms to raise a glass to raising standards. Goodbye.
Thank you for listening to our podcast. You can find every episode on iTunes, YouTube, and Spotify. The views expressed by each guest in the podcast are their own. They do not represent the opinions of the Parliamentary Review, Westminster Publications, Lord Pickles, Lord Blunkett, David Curry, or any other guest on the podcast. If you'd like to know more about the Parliamentary Review, please visit www.theparliamentaryreview.co.uk.